Righty, let's get it going. As Yantis has already explained, my name is Chris Kaya. I work for a company that is in the technology space, and I've been in data and analytics for a very long time, and working in particular with these AI technologies. My speech today, it will be slightly different. I'm tempted as a technologist to go into more detail about the underlying technologies that are presented with artificial intelligence. But I want to elevate our discussion a bit higher so that we have a clear bird's eye view on what the landscape really looks like and how we got to where we are. So the way I'll structure my speech is to firstly start with understanding how we got to where we are as a society, worldwide, and also take a look at what artificial intelligence is all about. And then we cast our gaze into the future to see what it will take for us to be successful in artificial intelligence. If you're one person who takes particular notice of the current mood in society, there's a lot of business leaders who feel stuck and immobilized because of a number of things. And one of them is because the world's moving at a furious pace. The wind is blowing and they don't know where they'll end up when the dust is settled. We are caught up in this pendulum and we don't know whether we're coming or whether we're going. And Renee has already painted a picture for us, what we're experiencing currently in 2020. What we do know, right, is that we stand on the edge of a seismic shift which is shaking the very ground that we stand on. The beliefs and ideologies that we as a society have held sacrosanct for decades are being disrupted, not only by COVID-19, but also by disruptive technologies that have become so pervasive. One thing that is certain, however, ladies and gentlemen, and which is undeniable, is that as humans, we're used to change, in particular, technological change. Technology has always and will always be part of our human society because it's used by humans. Technology has always been central in determining the positions and the power statuses of empires. You certainly cannot separate technology from social change. It's either technological change causes social change or the reverse. If change is a normal part of our human existence, I know the natural logical question that most of us are asking is, why then are we finding it difficult to deal with the change in our midst? In answering this question, indulge me for a moment as I try to build some context. I want to segue and use an example that I came across recently. I recently came across an interesting philosophy of life from the strangest of places while listening to what I term one of the greatest philosophers in our modern time. I was watching a Netflix special from the stand-up comedian Dave Chappelle. He introduced a phenomenon he called standing too close to an elephant. He explained that focusing on the ugly event, maybe in our case, COVID-19 and the disruptive technologies that are characterized for the fourth industrial revolution, is like standing too close to an elephant, where you don't see the entire picture of the situation because your focus is too narrow. The enormity of the elephant overwhelms the entire picture. What is required is for us to take a step back. If I extend this analogy, from the vantage point of the present, we might not see the entire picture. Whether you're talking about business or politics, the smaller trends are embedded in larger, bigger trends. They say history may not repeat itself, but it does have a rhythm. And when you look at history, we're confronted with two types of change that we all know about. The first change we're all familiar is evolutional change, which is slow, pedestrian, and incremental in nature. The other is revolutionary change, which is fast, radical, and unpredictable. Now, it is this unpredictability that is the root of the tension that most senior executives are finding difficult to deal with because they were trained to manage organizations in a predictable world. Now, if we focus on technological revolution, we see that there are two basic features. While these signs may not be widely acknowledged, they are very, very clear. Firstly, a technological revolution, there's a strong interconnectedness and interdependence of participating systems. Right now, we're seeing a convergence of different technologies. Secondly, a technological revolution has the capacity to transform profoundly the rest of the economy and eventually transform society. I'm sure right now we're witnessing the fabric of and the structure of our economy being reshaped in front of our eyes. Some of the engines that come with these technological revolutions, that are engines of growth, are, for example, cheap new inputs, new products, and new processes. What won't be required from us as leaders is to follow hype-up trends blindly. That won't guarantee success because our preconceived misconceptions are just as dangerous as the information that we don't have. What is required is what I term being adjacent to the technology. Being tech adjacent is not merely trying to speculate or predict the future, but rather it's about watching important shifts and trends as they're happening. So when you look closely at these technologies, they give us a sense of where things are going. As the saying goes, tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming. Let me put it this way. The actual path of a raindrop as it goes down the valley is unpredictable, but the general direction is inevitable. So in a large sense, you could say the telephone was inevitable, but the iPhone was not. The internet was inevitable, but Facebook was not. Given that the stakes are very high as we stand right now, what we cannot be found doing as leaders is to be found sleeping during a revolution. In fact, Martin Luther King warned his contemporaries about 50 years ago when they were faced with a similar challenge that we're facing today. He said, one of the greatest liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. He went on to say, today our very survival depends on our abilities to stay awake, not to adjust to new ideas and to remain vigilant and face the challenges of change. Fortunately, today, you are in this conference where we're discussing topical and important issues that have a very strong bearing on how we craft the future to come. And thank you, Renee, for reminding us as leaders that we need to deploy these technologies in a responsible way because they will affect generations to come. Now, let me take a moment to focus on artificial intelligence and understand what it is and also see what the opportunities it presents, because everyone is telling us how important it is and that we need to integrate it into our businesses to become global players. But in order to embrace the concept, we first need to understand it. What we've noticed is that public perception of what AI can do sometimes outstrips reality. But in its simplest definition, AI comprises of different technologies that combine in different ways to sense, comprehend, act, and learn. So in practical terms, what this means is working with machines to do our jobs better, create greater efficiencies, and drive economic growth. What we've seen recently is an acceleration of AI as a result of three main factors that most of us, I'm sure, are aware of. One of which is the quantum leap in computing power, driven by the growth of cloud computing, and also the explosion of big data And lastly, the investment that we started to see in research and development into these AI technologies. Some of the emerging technologies include computer vision, audio processing, natural language processing, machine learning, and expert systems. So these self-directing and self-adaptive technologies combine with data mining and pattern recognition, among others, to enable AI solutions such as virtual agents, which is the online chatbots that we're seeing right now replacing call center agents and support staff, cognitive robotics, speech analytics, which is software that recognizes speech patterns, identity analytics, recommendation systems, data visualization. Most organizations in South Africa are in the early stages in terms of the actual implementation of such solutions. What we're starting to see, however, is that these underlying AI technologies are now underpinning a lot of products and services. Now, if we cast our gaze into the future, the obvious question that most of us are asking is, what will it take for us to become successful in this digital era? For one, it will require us to change our mindsets. Some organizations are still thinking in annual cycles, while the world is not moving in annual cycles. And 2020 has really shown us that things really change at a fast pace, and we really need to be on top of our toes. So AI is not just something that you just add or append at the end of your business. It reminds me more like the history of electrification, because AI in some circles has been described as the new electricity. So you see, when you electrified your factory, you changed the nature of power distribution. So prior to electrification, power in a factory was really driven around a single node of power, perhaps driven by a steam engine. So you had this huge lump of power, usually positioned in the middle of the factory, and you had power tools organized around it. So what electricity allowed you to do is to allow the flow of small amounts of power all over the factory. So now what you could do now is break these processes into smaller little processes and change the dynamic of the factory. So in order for us to benefit from the current technological advancements, we need to perhaps reassess and possibly readjust our business models and operating models. In order for us to look ahead, to understand what it will take for us to be successful, or our businesses and our organizations to be successful, we first need to understand how organizations were successful in the previous era. At the turn of the 20th century, leading companies excelled as harnessing traditional forms of capital. So the early pioneers were better approaches to business economics, and those that excelled were very good at financial capital management, which gave them a competitive edge. As the turn of the century progressed, two additional forms of equity became very important. One of them was human capital, which is the return gained from development and the deployment of your staff and contractors. The other was natural capital. And this is the manageable value of land, water, and other environmental resources. So you see, businesses that were successful came to depend on managing these three forms of capital effectively. What we're seeing now in the digital era, which is characterized by an increase of technological innovation, three forms of capital have now emerged that are very critical in creating value. And these forms of capital are, the first is behavioral capital. And this is capital which is developed by tracking ongoing activities. This could be tracking humans or a human activity, or tracking your movable assets. And some examples that I can think about is, for example, the Apple Watch measures ongoing heart rate. General Electric aircraft engines records data of fuel performance. Google captures everything about everyone on its platforms. If we look here in South Africa, a company that's doing this very well is Discovery, which measures everything about their customers, from their insurance with their telematic technology, medical aid, and recently with their introduction of the bank, they measure the financial activity. This data can be used to enhance the customer experience or offer customers the ideal products and services. Now we hear about the segment of one. The second capital that has now started to emerge, which is becoming very important, is cognitive capital. And this is the value inherent in algorithms. Renee has already given us a view of how powerful these algorithms are, because some of these algorithms have become so sophisticated enough to make decisions on their own. An example I like using is the hedge fund, the giant hedge fund Bridgewater, which is run by a billionaire Ray Dalio. This hedge fund uses artificial intelligence-based algorithms to make decisions, and that's how powerful it is. The last capital that is becoming very critical in the digital era is network capital. And this is the connection points with people, machines that a company can deploy. Example is maybe Netflix, which has developed over the years a large group of followers who have gotten to the habit of watching a lot of movies and then engaging in social media about what they've watched. So this consistent engagement is a form of network capital. So ladies and gentlemen, each of these forms of capital that I've just mentioned compound on themselves and are exponential in growth and are reinforcing on each other and are very powerful when they are mashed together. So companies that are using all these 6 forms of capital are what are called BIONIC corporations. And this is the anatomy of a corporation that is positioned to excel in this coming era. So if you had to look at some of the companies that are excelling right now, most of them are using a greater portion of these capital, if not all of them. So in my view, this is what it will take for companies to become very successful in harnessing all the capital that they have at their disposal. With the very short time that I had, I hope that I gave you an enlightenment on what it is, what it's going to take for us to be successful as leaders. And it's fortunate that you're here in this conference, that you can engage with us and we can give you a view of what our thoughts are pertaining to this discussion. Yandile, thank you for allowing me to present this. I think that's all from me.